Gives me a couple of seconds. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Jazakallah for joining tonight's session. And again, hand over to Maulana, inshallah, to continue from here. Maulana, over to you. Maulana, you on mute?
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله على دين الإسلام. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وبعد. ويقول الله سبحانه وتعالى بشأن حبيب الكريم مخبرا وآمرا قولا كريما إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا جعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. ويقول الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم كلكم بني آدم وآدم من طين. صدقت يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So we're carrying on the theme of last week on racism, and I thought it prudent if we can share that for a few minutes at least, or you can even, well, I think it's a 23 minutes, so if you can take out of it about 8 to 10 minutes will be a good idea. This is a recording of a Hindu gentleman in America where they attended a conference and where he gave a bit of insight into racist ideologies. I thought it was interesting since it's relevant to what we are discussing. So it's a global phenomenon. Samir, you want to try that and see if it comes on?
Okay.
Bismillah. And then we'll, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Maulana, can you hear?
I hope
absolutely.
you had your dinner,
Yeah.
but not too much, otherwise you'll be sleepy and not pay attention. Thank you so much once again for being here. I'm here to talk to you about an ideology that I'm sure some of you know about. It is called Hindutva. That's a strange word. Hindutva is a word that basically denotes Hindu nationalism. Now, those of you who do not know, who have not heard of Hindu nationalism, must be wondering what is this about. But I would imagine that most of you are very, very aware of two other ideologies. One is Zionism, that needs no introduction, and the other is white racism, that also needs no introduction. Both these ideologies of Zionism and white racism are fundamentally anti-democratic ideologies that are supremacist to the core because they believe in the supremacy of one set of people in exclusion of all the other people. We've seen what Zionism has done to the Middle East, especially in the last 75 years. The history of white racism, especially in the United States, has been extremely toxic. And now we have the ideology of Hindu nationalism. Just to give you a sense of what Hindu nationalism is, today is 28th of May. On this day, 28th of May, in 1883, a man was born in India. His name was Savarkar. That was his last name, Savarkar. He was a Brahmin, a Hindu Brahmin. In the year 1922, he first propounded this ideology of Hindutva. It is interesting how through the history of India, for hundreds of years, Indian Hindus and Christians and Muslims and Sikhs and Parsis and people of other faiths had lived together in peace and harmony. But around the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century, especially the British colonial masters, they started creating a divide between Hindus and Muslims. And that is when Savarkar created this ideology of Hindutva. This ideology is very clear. It says that India is the land of the Hindus because their forefathers started out in this country and they created the religion of Hinduism thousands of years ago. And the ideology of Hindutva also says that Muslims and Christians are foreigners, regardless of the fact that Christianity had existed on the Indian subcontinent for 2000 years, regardless of the fact that Islam has existed on the Indian subcontinent from the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This ideology said that Muslims of the subcontinent and Christians of the subcontinent were foreigners in their own country, where they had lived for centuries, for generations, because their religion, the ideology said, Savarkar said, had come from outside of India. This ideology started taking root around that time. And in 1925, just 2 or 3 years after Savarkar first propounded this ideology, a new organization was founded. The name of that organization is RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Fast forward 100 years. Today, India is ruled by a political party which is an offshoot of the RSS. It is a Hindu nationalist party. Today, India's president, India's prime minister, India's vice president, India's cabinet of ministers, they're all people who belong to the RSS. They're sworn to the Hindutva ideology of Hindu nationalism. Their one goal, single goal, is to convert India into a Hindu country. India was freed from British colonial rule in 1947, and in 1950, fully 72 years ago, India gave itself a pluralist constitution that says all Indians are equal. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Parsis, Jains, as well as people of no faith, they are all equal. This country belongs to all of them. But today, the RSS wants to change that constitution. They have already started with the citizenship law. Some of you may already know that in the last 8 years that the RSS has been in government in India, the attacks on Muslims have increased many, many folds. Tens of thousands of people have been put in prison. Thousands of Muslims have been lynched merely for being Muslims, walking down the street with just because they're wearing a skull cap or they have a beard, they have been attacked in full public view and murdered. Tens of thousands of Muslim girls are being denied education in India because they wear the hijab. Mosques are attacked, vandalized, set on fire, demolished by the government. Muslim businesses, Muslim homes, they're all under attack. Now, the citizenship of India's 200 million plus Muslims is also under attack. This is an existential threat. This is, as has been said by a very, very reputed organization in the United States, Genocide Watch, this is a genocide of Muslims underway. Now pause for a minute and think about it. India has more than 200 million Muslims. By some estimates, the number is about 250 million. If India's Muslims were to be counted as a country, they would be the world's fifth most populated country. It is such a large body of people. And now we see there's intense hatred created by this ideology in India's society, in India's government, in India's legislatures, federal as well as state legislatures, where conversion is being criminalized, where Muslim men marrying non-Muslim women are being caught by the police and being sent to prison, where there is a fundamental attack to the very existence of Muslims because they are Muslims. Now you might ask, there is so many problems in the world. If there are so many countries where Muslims live and there are so many problems that Muslims in other countries face, why should we be focusing on India? There are two reasons why India has to be the number one priority, especially for American Muslims, especially for the global Muslim community also. The first reason is that this ideology of Hindutva is not anymore confined to India. It has now traveled across the globe. In Australia, in the United Kingdom, in the Baltic countries, in Germany, in Canada, and of course right here in the United States of America. Hindutva ideology, the ideology of Hindu supremacy, is all around us. There are over a dozen organizations that are very closely connected with the RSS in India. These are organizations such as the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, HSS, which is a mirror image of the RSS. There is a Vishwa Hindu Parishad in India, there is a Vishwa Hindu Parishad in America. There is a Hindu-American Foundation which does political advocacy here, and it does not tolerate any criticism.
Maulana, head over back to you.
Jay, no. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I thought it was a valuable clip also for our own general knowledge, because I think sometimes we are so busy in our cocoons, as it were, in our own little worlds, earning a living, etc. And we get cut off from the global ummah. And I found this a very revealing assessment. Although he was concentrating on Hindutva, which is, these are synonyms of racist ideologies that we discussed last week as well. I think we talked about Zionism, we talked about Brahmanism, we talked about, see, there was another one. Yeah, apartheid, obviously, I think we localized ours last week. But as you can see, just as Jewish political Zionism has globalized, you can't say anything and then it's anti-Semitic. And the present Indian government, who is also extremely racist, are also galvanizing all their resources globally. And I suspect that 8 years ago, when Netanyahu went to India, or Modi went to Israel, this was all on the agenda. They must have asked the Jews, how do you go about this? What do you do, etc., etc., etc. Because shortly after that, very similar pattern, control of the media, etc., and deliberate, to the point that this Hindu nationalist ideology is now in every country, that the embassies of India, among the other work, they are making it a point to promote that India is only for Hindus, and they obviously discounting Muslims initially, but also the Christians, Parsis, and then of course there's other Hindu castes who are absolute Hindu. They have the same beliefs as them, but because they're not Brahmin, or they're not upper class, or they're not in the caste system, they're right at the bottom. they also are excluded. So they're also suffering from almost a what we want to call a reverse racism. Similar like in South Africa, you had a whiter racism, and now there is a pocket of black racism, as it were. Pan-Africanism, but not just in a simple political sense, like Africa for the Africans, but also with this ethnic and racial connotations. So far, it hasn't raised its head except on two occasions. One was in the 1950s, and then with violence. And then, of course, the riots that happened in Devon not too long ago. There were racial undertones, but there were a lot of political, and there was also the socio-economic situation that made people jump on the bandwagon, as it were. And in the end, it just fizzled out into absolute just wanton looting and destruction. But sometimes you just need that. You see, like similarly, like in India, the racial riots. You just need it's the tension is on the ground, so you just need something to light it, and the politicians have mastered that in as it were. So it's when we talk about racism, none of those ideologies, not Brahmanism, not Hindutva, not Zionism, not white racist supremacism as is being practiced in America, in Europe, even the colonial and imperial projects that where they colonized all of Africa, colonized the world, colonized India, etc., etc. Those colonizers and imperialists actually took those differences because Muslims lived everywhere in the world. They lived with a relative peace, and they had respect if you had a different you know views, etc. Yes, there are a lot of Muslims that are racist, and that comes from their subcultural understandings, not the Islamic understandings of the human being, as we discussed. And the Quran is emphatic. Uh, you know, uh, we have created you, O humankind. We have created you in nations and in tribes. لِتَعَارَفُوا. The key, as we talked last week, was that لِتَعَارَفُوا, for mutual recognition. I recognize you, you recognize me. It becomes a sense of identity, not to discriminate, to identify, but not to discriminate. And that's the difference with the Islamic. And there is no other ideology or system of life that supports, defines, and shows the parameters of the equality of the human being, or the essence of the human being, except Islam. So Brahmanism, Hindutva, as is now presently being, Zionism, white racist supremacism, apartheid, Nazi Aryanism, and they share a bit of historical incidents with the Hindutva, where the concept of Arya meaning like pure. In fact, the Germans, the Nazi Germans, developed a concept. I remember it in my academic studies, Untermensch, and they called it Untermensch. That means, superior person, a superior nation, as it were. And of course, there's absolutely no basis, not academically, because I looked at the arguments of the early people, the 1800 ones, the 1700 scholars, the time of the British Empire, who developed these concepts, foisted it upon the colonialized peoples, and they unfortunately accepted it to the point that we, even as we sit here today, our fathers, their fathers, the early people that came to South Africa, having been exposed to the caste system in India and lived by it as well. You go to our Cockney villages, you go to our Soti villages, you go to our Melon villages, you'll find that there's even differences within ethnic subgroups. You know, uh, and many a time they used to use that to discriminate that those family names that are there for centuries. That family is superior. That family is like in India. The mochi is a cobbler. He's for that shoemaker. So he's on the lower rung. Achut, untouchable. These are the people that clean the garbage, etc. Brahman, he is the absolute on the apex of that pyramid. For that matter, tribalism is not far in South Africa either. If you look at some of the new politics from '94, the undertones are there. We don't understand it because it's not shown, and I don't think any of us have maybe tried to study it academically. But there's definitely a tension between the Zulus, the Sutus, the Swazis, the different ethnic groups. They get along at certain points, and the proof of that is in the apartheid time, from different countries and different places. Uh, then they would work at the mines in Johannesburg. I'm not aware. I haven't read enough, but I'm not aware that there was sort of violent confrontation. They all were together in the hard work and back-breaking work that there was, but the understanding that us and them, that we are Zulu, you are Chichewa, we are Susutu, you are Mozambican, etc. That clearly did exist, and the proof of that is in South Africa the homophobia that has happened, and that is like where human beings fear each other on the basis of race or perceptions of what the other people are. I mean, uh, we do the same. We sometimes say the Nigerians are like this because a majority of them seem to be, or at least the media tells us that they're involved in a lot of like kidnappings and drugs and laundering. And similarly, unfortunately, the word Pakistani, when it is raised, also similar connotations. And of course, we as a micro community of Lodium or Pretoria know about the series of kidnappings and how there were Pakistanis behind it. So there is this way nationalist identities or ethnic identities are generalized, and because of sometimes a handful behave like that. Sometimes, of course, a lot of them behave that way and deserve the labor. But it's generally a generalization. So a person must be careful of saying, "Oh, the Cockneys are like this. Oh, the Maoris are like this. Oh, the whites are like this. Oh, the blacks are like that." It is problematic from an Islamic point of view as well. Each person be treated with respect, and if your rights are being undermined by that person or that group, then you withhold it. That's the prophetic mode with dealing with racism or oppression. Uh, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahaba Ikram, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them, you people must not oppress anybody. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, and don't allow others to oppress you. That was the hadith. So some of the companions said, Ya Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we understand not to oppress. We've seen your way of life. We know how it is, and we they're intrinsically good people. They wouldn't just go around willy nilly, oppressing people. But they said, how do we withhold oppression? So contextually, it could have been the Meccan period where oppression was very much rampant, that even the Prophet ﷺ was given permission by Allah to leave to make the hijrah because of the racist attitudes of and oppressive attitudes of the Meccan ruling family. Um, so it's very widespread. It's everywhere. But these people, some of the writers, some of the authors, some of the politicians, almost made it like as if it is a legitimate concept. The colonial and imperialist politicians and leaders and politicians and rulers, kings, queens, whoever they were, they actually actively supported academic studies of the of the of the of the of the people that were colonized, of the oppressed or the controlled populations, in order to understand them, to further perpetuate the control. And that's why, uh, you know, you notice Dutch imperialism, British colonialism, French imperialism, Belgian imperialism in the Africa. Up to today, the after effects of those projects, which were defined on a theory, they put it to work as another tool of control. So that's the other thing that racists do. They actually want control. And so they label the opposite person and propagate that idea that that person is black, that person is uneducated, that person is uncivilized. Like in Hindutva, Muslims are impure, Muslims are uh, colonizers, oppress. They came to India and wielded the sword and things like that. Of course, they don't look at the culture, knowledge, the language, the monuments that have been left behind. So, the link between Aryanism and or Aryan, which is an ancient Indo-Asian, Indo-Iranian. The Iranians actually developed something. Again, they as an empire, and of course, Islam and the Prophet ﷺ's movement. Islam then put paid to the Persian and Roman empires, as you know. The Quran even talks about that. غُلِبَتِ الرُّوم, and then Rome was conquered, and even about Caesar and Kisra in, uh, in Persia, and how the Prophet ﷺ told one of the Sahabis that he sees the bangles of Caesar of Kisra, that means of the Persian kings, and he then went on decades later to conquer Persia and Islamize it to the point that today it's considered a Muslim nation, although the majority are Shia. That happened later in the history. So, for our information, we must understand that our definition of any concept that is running in the world, if they say democracy, we first apply the Quranic and the prophetic principle. If they say free market system, we apply the Medinian model, etc., etc. So none of these, not Brahmanism, because there is no priestly high class, uh, like all the pandits and gurus, as they call them in India, are from the Brahmin caste. So if you're a non-Brahmin, you can't really, you know, approach that position. So that in itself it shows the endemic racist and exclusivist ideas that reside, that was dreamt up, as the speaker also said, that somebody somewhere dreamt up the idea and it came. Theodore Herzl dreamt up the idea of Zionism as a racist ideology. Nazism appropriated from earlier concepts of white supremacists, uh, and they also borrowed from the Arya concept, which the Hindutvas also got to where they derived it from. So, for our benefit, let us understand that these ideologies are false. They may be powerful, they may be controlling, they may have had hundreds of years, like the British Empire. In fact, the first clash between Muslims and Hindus actually in the modern period happened as a result of the instigation of the British. They incited the two groups because they had a maxim of political hegemony and rule, and they said that divide and rule. So any means that you can divide, you divide by economic stratification, that you may have a high class, a wealthy high class, and a poor low class, so that you can't live in there, you can't be there, they separate, etc., etc. There is some of that, of course, in our society as well, because if you can't afford to live in a certain area, you can't be there. So this is just one of those ways. Another thing that we must be aware of is reverse racism. So the value of our two talks is look internal to yourself, redefine your concept of humanity and the multinational ethnicities that you come to in South Africa and globally, and adjust your perception about these people until proven otherwise. And the only way that you can discriminate is by the piety or the closeness of the person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shukran. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just for barakah, if there is a question, we'll take it. Otherwise, we'll end because it's 2015.
No questions.
Not even a barakah question. Now we must start. I think we must do like where you have these TV audiences, then they get told before that when you get the sign, then you must clap hands. When you get the other sign, you must stand up and shout. Just to make the audience lively in the. But I think we need a little bit more. Even if it is one or two questions, I think we must start because a question is the first act of learning. Actually, a question is the first act of learning. So it's not good just to be passive recipients. Even if you trust the person, a question, and no question is foolish, no question is useless, no question is stupid, please. And a question is, as I said, the beginning of the road of learning. So we would appreciate, maybe we must do like that TV audiences, plants a few people, give them the questions in advance to just ask it to start it off, inshallah. And then maybe we'll get it moving. Good. Anything further? Over to administrator.
No, Maulana. Inshallah, next week we continue. Jazakallah to everyone and Jazakallah to Maulana. Shukran.
Bye. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.